Yo, book nerds, I finished reading The Odyssey by Homer. This edition is translated by George Herbert Palmer. This is a different translator than the translator that I had for the Iliad. And this translator does it a little differently. So the translator for the Iliad in the edition that I read kept it in poetry format, and the language was a little easier to read. This translator wrote it more like a novel instead of poetry. The language in this was harder than the language in the Iliad, in the editions that I have. So I just want to throw that out there. It took me a little bit longer to get into the Odyssey for that reason. I think if it maybe would have been the same translator, it would have been easier for me to just dive right in. But that being said, I really enjoyed this story. I thought it was a great adventure. I understand why it has stood the test of time. It was a wild ride. So what is this about? Well, this is an ancient Greek epic poem. So it is a story that has been passed down for generations. It had been told orally and now it's been written down. This story is about Odysseus. Odyssey, Odysseus, that's where that comes from. And Odyssey has come to mean a long adventure of twists and turns, and that comes from this story. This is a long adventure with many twists and turns. Oftentimes, an Odyssey means that everyone on the adventure is going to die except for the main character. And I don't consider that a spoiler because in the Odyssey, it tells you that in the first line. The opening lines tell you exactly what's going to happen. Again, Homer calls on the Muses. He did that in the Iliad. He does it again in the Odyssey. Tell of the storm-tossed man, O Muse, who wandered long after he sacked the sacred citadel of Troy. Many the men whose towns he saw, whose ways he proved, and many a pang he bore in his own breast at sea, while struggling for his life and his men's safe return. Yet even so, despite his zeal, he did not save his men, though through their own perversity they perished, having recklessly devoured the cattle of the exalted sun, who therefore took away the day of their return. Of this, O goddess, daughter of Zeus, speak as thou wilt to us. So literally, we were just told everyone on this adventure, everyone on this journey with Odysseus will die except Odysseus. And so we know that from the get-go, that this is going to be a long story about Odysseus returning home from the Trojan War. The name Odysseus comes from the word odious, odious meaning, hateful, not good. And so an Odyssey is probably not a good journey. There's probably a lot of sorrow, a lot of bad things happen on an Odyssey. Odysseus went to Troy to fight in the Trojan War, and after they won, he tries to come home. He had been fighting in the Trojan War for 10 years, and then it's time to come home. And he is trying to get home for another 10 years. So he has been gone for 20 years. We find out that he has faced many mishaps. He's had some battles with some monsters, and he's just trying to get home. That's all he wants. So that's what this tale is about. I thought it was told very well. There was lots of action. It was interesting. It's not told straight through. You actually start off following Odysseus' son, Telemachus. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Telemachus is his son, and his son is trying to keep all these men away from his mother. His mother has been living, praying for Odysseus to come home to her. She has been faithful to him. Everyone thinks Odysseus is dead, and all these men have come around trying to woo her, trying to get her to marry them. They're the suitors. And Telemachus, his house has become overrun with suitors. He's now the man of the house, and he's trying to keep these suitors in check and try and protect his mom, and he's mourning for his dad because he also thinks that Odysseus is dead. And these suitors are they're spending all his money, they're eating all his food, they're just not good people. And so that's kind of where the story begins. And then it switches over to Odysseus, and you get Odysseus recounting all of his tales, all the things that have kept him from getting home. So if you don't want to know anything more than that, I will leave it at that. I thought this story was really great. I enjoyed it. I'm so glad that I read it. Now I want to get into some spoilery talk. So, forewarning, spoiler alert. So this story, you find out Odysseus has been trying to get home for 20 years, and he goes through a lot of trials. Starting back with the Trojan War, we finally get a little bit in here about the Trojan horse. That was Odysseus' idea to win the war, and it worked. Odysseus is often referred to as wise Odysseus. He comes up with ideas. He is a thinker, and he came up with the Trojan horse. I had expected that in the Iliad, but we finally got it in the Odyssey a little bit. It's kind of mentioned in there. We also find out that Agamemnon went home, and his wife did not wait for him like Odysseus's wife is waiting for him. She has a lover, and her lover kill Agamemnon. So there's this parallel between Agamemnon being gone and his wife not being faithful. His wife is Clytemnestra, and she's actually the sister of Helen, so both of them not faithful to their husbands. And Agamemnon dies as soon as he gets home. And so there's this parallel between Odysseus trying to get home to his faithful wife, Penelope. Quickly, we do find out about Helen. She is not killed by Menelaus for betraying her. He actually forgives her and takes Helen home, and they are living happily ever after in Sparta, which surprised me. I thought he would kill her for leaving him and going with Paris, but he didn't. But like I said, we had been following Telemachus for a while, and actually we don't really meet up with Odysseus until book 9. That's when we finally get Odysseus recounting all the things that happened to him to keep him from returning home. We find out that his first big trial was he met the Cyclops, and that's like one of the most famous things from this story is Odysseus battling the Cyclops. And the Cyclops actually kind of gives a prediction, a prayer for everything else that is to come. So this story does that a lot, where they tell you what's going to happen and then it happens. So lots of predictions, lots of repetition, kind of like in the Iliad. Odysseus fights with the Cyclops. He wounds the Cyclops' eye and blinds him. And the Cyclops says that he knew this was going to happen, that there was this prophet. He says, "He told me it should come to pass in after time that I should lose my sight by means of one Odysseus. But I was always watching for the coming of some tall and comely person arrayed in mighty power. And now a little miserable, feeble creature blinded me of my eye, overcoming me with wine. Nevertheless, come here, Odysseus, and let me give the stranger's gift and beg the famous land shaker to aid you on your way home. His son am I. He calls himself my father. He, if he will, shall heal me. None else can, whether among the blessed gods or mortal men." So we find out that the Cyclops is the earth shaker's son, which is Poseidon. So Poseidon's probably going to be mad at Odysseus. And then the Cyclops prays to Poseidon and says, "Hear me, thou girder of the land, dark-haired Poseidon, if I am truly thine, and thou art called my father, vouchsafe no coming home to this Odysseus, spoiler of cities, Laertes' son, whose home is Ithaca. Yet if it be his lot to see his friends once more, and reach his stately house and native land, late let him come, in evil plight, with loss of all his crew, on the vessel of a stranger, and may he at his home find trouble." And that's exactly what happens. Poseidon grants his wish. He allows Odysseus to eventually get home, but it has to be done through a lot of struggle, a lot of strife. He does lose all of his crew. He is taken home on the vessel of a stranger, And when he gets home, he finds the suitors. So we get all of this information right off the bat. So even though it's kind of spoilery, like Homer's spoiling it for us. So I can't really say it's a spoiler for me to say it because Homer spoils it already. So we know what's going to happen. So his first trial is this Cyclops. After the Cyclops, he leaves, he meets giants. Giants kill a bunch of his men. Then he meets Circe, who keeps him captive for a bit. He has to go to the land of the dead, and he talks with some people that are dead. Then Odysseus has a run-in with some sirens. He has a run-in with Scylla and Charybdis. Again, I don't know if I'm saying those names correctly, but they're monsters. They kill some of his men. Scylla is a monster that lives in a cliff and has lots of heads that like reach down and yank people off of his ship. And Charybdis is a monster that lives in the sea in a whirlpool and tries to suck down the ship. Then they land on an island that has some animals that belong to the sun god. They're told not to eat these animals, not to kill them. Odysseus' crew doesn't listen. They do it anyway, and then they face the sun god's wrath. So you've got lots of gods, lots of monsters, lots of wrath. And then finally Odysseus is taken captive by Calypso, a goddess, and held there for many years. She wants him to be her lover, and she promises to make him a god if he becomes her husband, but he doesn't want to do that. He just wants to get home to Penelope. And finally, Athena intervenes. Poseidon is kind of off. He's busy, he's distracted, so Athena takes advantage, and she kind of gets Odysseus away from Calypso, and eventually he does get home. Poseidon's mad about this, but it's been 20 years since he's been home, so it did take a long time. But it's not over. Just like the Cyclops prayed, there's trouble at home. The suitors are there. Penelope doesn't want to marry any of them, but she's feeling pressured to. She finally agrees to marry one of them if they can prove themselves worthy. And Odysseus comes in and he massacres all of the suitors. And that scene is written so graphically, and it's graphic in the way that the Iliad was also graphic. There's lots of descriptions of body parts being stabbed and mutilated, and yeah, it's violent, gory. There's just a lot of carnage. It's very, very graphic. This slaughter of the suitors and some of Odysseus's servants too that have become loyal to the suitors. He even slaughters them as well. There is no mercy. It's just slaughter. Overall, I thought this was written so well. I really enjoyed the story. I would say I liked the Iliad a bit more, but that might have to do with the translation. So take that with a grain of salt, because translations do matter. I thought this translation was good, but after having been used to the way the Iliad was translated and then switching to this, it was a bit jarring for me personally. I love Odysseus. He is wise. He is smart. He is the definition of move in the shadows. He knows about the suitors. He doesn't act right away. He takes his time. He is calculating. He waits for the right moment, and it always works for him because he just waits for the right time to strike. And I love that. I think it's so awesome. Like it had me on the edge of my seat. Like, oh, when is he gonna strike? What's he gonna do next? He kind of goes undercover a little bit almost. I like it. He moves in the shadows. This story just also has a lot to say about the power of love, true love. Penelope just waits for her husband. She is so loyal to him. She will lie to the suitors. She will string them along just to get them to wait longer for her answer because she doesn't want to give them an answer because she's secretly waiting for her husband to come home. She believes him to be dead, but she is still so loyal to him, she doesn't want to believe it. There's so much more I could say about the Odyssey, but honestly, it's just something that you should read and experience on your own. So I think I will probably leave it at that. I really enjoyed the story. I'm glad I finally read it, and I think everyone should give it a shot. If you've read the Odyssey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Did you enjoy it as much as I did? Did you like the Odyssey more than the Iliad or less than the Iliad? I think I liked it a little less than the Iliad, but again, it might just be the translation. Both stories were very, very good. I see why they have stood the test of time and have survived thousands of years. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. I have started rereading the ODYSSEY, Agamemnon, the Libation Bearers, the Eumenides by Aeschylus. This is a trilogy of plays. They are ancient Greek plays, and they are about Agamemnon after his return from the Trojan War. So I have just started this. I'm not very far into it, but this will be coming soon. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope you have a lovely week. I will talk to you again next Monday. Hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for talking books with me.